Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. This is the first of this year's season of Arts Chats, which is a series that we do here with the Art Center at NYUAD, along with the CDC, the Career Development Center, looking at the career trajectories of artists who've come in and working with our Art Center. So we are filming this. It won't be live streamed. We're going to film it and we're going to upload this. So if there's any issues, let us know. And thanks for all for coming out. We are going to have a bit of time at the end for questions and casual conversations. So thanks everyone. I'll introduce myself. My name is Lindsay Bostrick. I'm the Director of Artistic Planning here at the Art Center. Before I was here, I spent about 15 years touring, first as an artist, performer, as well as then a manager and a producer. So this is a theme that's very close to my heart, and something that I think especially for the young people who are in our audience today, as well as watching on the video, is something that we think about when you're studying the arts, the ideas that we have in our mind about what does it mean to tour, to travel, and then how does that affect our work. So I don't know if it's best if you just want to say quickly your name and your role here working at the Art Center.
I'm Audrey Hales. I am movement director for the reality show. Second year. Super glad to be back.
I'm Matthew Dean Marsh. I'm a composer and musician, and I'm the music director for the reality show. And this is my first year doing that at NYU Abu Dhabi.
Hi, I'm Rachel Pegram, and I'm the associate director for the Real AD show, and it's also my first year doing it here in Abu Dhabi.
Hi, I'm Candice Edmonds. I'm the artistic director of Vox Motus, who are presenting Flight here this week.
I'm Simon Wilkinson, and I'm the lighting designer for Flight.
Great. So as I was going through everyone's bios, I was getting super excited because you all have very different relationships to travel in your work, or at least I think so. And so I thought I would just start with a few different questions, and then we can kind of see how everybody connects. So Candice, I want to start with you because in your bio, you actually say that you create touring works.
Yes.
And I find that that's interesting that you actually spell it out and label it like that. And so I'm curious to know, or if you could share a little bit, is when you're approaching a new piece, do you think about the touring aspect of it?
Sure.
Is it connected to the artistic element?
Sure. So when we first started Vox Motus, we're based in Glasgow in Scotland, and when we first started making work about 14 years ago now, 15 years ago, it was a condition of our government funding that you took the work around Scotland. That is no longer a precondition of receiving a grant, but when we were coming up through the ranks, it was. And so from day one, you had to think about what it was you were making, who you were taking it to, and where you were physically going to take it. And as anyone that's worked in touring knows, no two venues are conveniently designed the same way. Like the Scottish touring circuit, which Simon and I know very intimately, goes from stages that are the size of postage stamps to great cavernous barns that you have to fill. And so from from day one, from our first touring show, we had to think about how we could create something that played consistently in all these variety of spaces. So for us, it's always been part of the DNA of how a show is built. It's never been a barrier or a constriction. It's just part of the DNA of what we made. So part of our whole artistic rationale was touring, because it had to be, otherwise we didn't get the grant to make the work in the first place. But then you become really passionate about taking shows out to different audiences, and actually it made me mad when the criteria changed and we didn't have to tour our work, because I think, well, everyone in Scotland is paying the taxes that pay the grant that eventually comes to us, so why should they not benefit from the work that's made from the money they put into the government? And we have seen, unfortunately, a bit of a death of the touring circuit in Scotland recently, but they're trying to revive it. It's funny how making that a condition of the money was the thing that kept the ecology going. And so for us, it's a really, it's a core part of our DNA. And even as Jamie and I work on projects outside of Vox Motus, our natural instinct to build something to tour still exists.
And would you say from the lighting perspective, well, you might be looking at the kind of maintaining that artistic vision in different houses. Is that the same when you're the lighting designer and dealing with local equipment and with elements that might be a little bit more difficult to kind of maintain?
Yeah, no, I think it totally is. Because also as a lighting designer, you have to think that you want every venue that sees the show to have a similar experience to the venue in which you created the show. So there's no point in making something for the first time that can't then be recreated every point on the road. So you're kind of constantly thinking about what the makeup of the venues is, what the abilities of the various venues are, and making sure that the show that you create doesn't overly tax any of those venues, or going back to the producer, going, this one venue that you've booked, it's not very well resourced, we'll need to find some additional money or some additional people in order to deliver the show for that audience.
Because that's, just to add to that, it's always been something that we've been really proud of in Vox Motus, is that we strive to deliver the same product to every venue, regardless of the restraints and the logistical issues, which has made our work previously quite expensive to tour, because we believe that every audience member should have the same quality of experience, and that comes with sacrifices, usually somewhere in the budget, but that's always been a big part of our thing, is to deliver the same vision for all audience members.
Which is kind of a unique situation with some touring companies, I think.
Oh,
they'll either have like a different kind of personnel, like some dance companies now have a B, but if you can't afford the A group, you're going to get, you know, the B group, something like that. So to have, and do you always tour with the shows?
Yeah, well, in the early days, you tour everywhere because it's your baby and you haven't learned to let go of the thing yet. And then my experience has been that as you get more experienced and you bring a more experienced team in around you, that there comes a point where you trust to hand over to your team and you can send them on their way and trust that the show will be everything that you want it to be in that space. But definitely for me, the venue it's created in, and then the first couple of moves, you always want to be there to make sure that it looks the way you want it to look, and then, you know, there comes a shared vision for the whole, particularly on our shows that are very technical with the whole tech team, and they understand exactly how you want it to look, and they understand your personal taste as far as how things maybe are masked or how things are lit, and then from there it can go off, have its life.
And as a lighting designer, you probably are faced with that option quite a bit. Do I send an assistant? Do I always go on the road? Do I leave after opening?
I quite rarely, this is quite rare for me actually, getting to be somewhere with a show at a point down its life. Because generally what will happen as a lighting designer is that you have a member of the production team whose job it is to recreate your lighting design in every venue. And because it's their job, producers are quite reluctant to send the original lighting designer to places, especially if those places are a long way away or expensive to get to. So a lot of the time it's you make the show, and the show goes to all of these exciting places on a map, and you sit at home working on, you know, 4 shows down the line. So also because of the volume of work that I typically do in a year, you know, I'll be doing somewhere between 12 and 16 shows a year.
Wow.
It means that once a show is done, you've got to kind of push it out the door, hand it up over to other people, deal with their questions if they've got questions down the line, but not typically move it each time.
So it's kind of a unique opportunity that you get to be kind of here. You've done a lot of the creative aspect of the work, and now you're kind of recreating it here.
Yeah, there've been a few, but it's the exception. There is a producer I worked with whose comment was that if you won't go and see the show in Newcastle, why should I send you to see it in New York?
Right here.
Now, on my left-hand side, you all are performers, and so the idea of not touring with a work is not necessarily the same conversation, that you are that touring company, right? And I'm curious to know, when you thought about your career as performers, was that always something that you considered, or was there a place in your life that you started to say, oh, okay, if I'm going to go here, I have to either be excited about this or be willing to have travel and touring as part of my life? I don't know. Matthew, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always wanted to travel and I always wanted to do music, so the fact that they could both line up and one could propel the other was very exciting to me. As a musician, I've mostly been offered like one-off like stints, like I'm doing a gig in Paris, will you come and play with me? Or I'm doing a show in LA, will you come and play with me? So it's always like, yeah, that sounds fun, I'm gonna go do that. And it was never like like, oh, I'm gonna like travel and do music, like I'm gonna make sure that that's the thing that happens. It's kind of organically evolved that way for me.
Right. I think similarly, as a dancer and an actor, I haven't been a part of a company in a long time. And I think, so freelancing is like, yeah, okay, yes, I'll come do this gig here and then I'll go back home. And I'll come do this. So for me, I think it did become a lot about like, where do I want to go in the world and who's going to pay me to go there, you know? And that was an exciting discovery to realize that I could curate my life in that way, that I could do the things that I care about doing in places that I hadn't been before. But yeah, like a tour is not so much in my wheelhouse, you know. I can't say what I just said. But yeah.
Rachel, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I would agree. I haven't necessarily been on a tour, but I've definitely like gone to festivals where I performed like solo, and like bringing my work that like, or doing shows just like not in the US, as a solo performer. And so it's like doing my own comedy in other countries is always really interesting because it's like, oh, how will they be receptive to it? And it's like the only way you can really know is by doing it, I've found. And it's been exciting to like go and like have just people, it feels very random at times of just like, oh, this is someone I already knew in New York, and they're like, yeah, do you want to do a show while you're in New Zealand? It's like, okay, sure. And getting put up on things, and also, yeah, getting invited to do, like I did a show in Montreal. Yeah, but it's not necessarily something that I'm like, I've planned, but I know that there are comedians who do have like, you know, do big touring things and like big like around the globe kind of stuff, but it's not necessarily where my work is taking me at this point. But yeah.
This is kind of an ephemeral one, but when I think about touring, that I'm curious to know, do you feel at home wherever you are doing your art, or do you feel like you have a home base and that is your home?
That's a great question.
Can I?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I think my experience, anyways, is we always make work in our hometown of Glasgow, but it has amazed me that no matter where we go, like you say, if you're putting your thing out there into the world, how much that roots you when you're there. And I've never felt odd or out of place putting that offering out there to an audience, and it's actually a lovely experience to go and give something. What's even more rewarding is when you get to take it to a place where there's some kind of exchange that happens as a result of that, like coming here to NYUAD and being able to do talks like this, to meet the student body, to meet the faculty, is so much more interesting and rewarding, and really gives the work a sense of reason for being, as opposed to turning up to an international festival. It's programmed, it's beautiful, it's glamorous, they have lots of nice shiny drinks receptions, but you never really feel like you meet anyone who's going to experience the work or have any kind of dialogue. And it's funny, when we first started Vox Motus, we were very lucky at that time in Glasgow. It was pre-financial crash, and there was a lot of international work coming into the city through various festivals. And we want to be an international touring company, I think, because we felt so fed by what we were seeing. And then we became an international touring company, and we realized it's really hard work. But what we've discovered is the most rewarding is those bookings where there is some level of dialogue and exchange, and you're not just going and presenting your thing anonymously and never kind of being fed back in a way, or interrogating something on a slightly deeper level. And if you, when those opportunities arise, that is like a gift, you know. You really feel the benefit of why did we go to all this massive effort and expense of taking work around the world.
Great. That's exciting because she's on day one here. On that note, thinking about home, well, actually, does anyone else want to answer that?
I could perhaps
Yeah.
just, because I've got a slightly different model as a lighting designer, but I'll quite often go to theatres that aren't in my hometown and work with them to make a show and then come back. And it really varies from theatre to theatre how much like home that feels, which I think often depends on the resident company within that building and the community that surrounds that building. And what I find is you have some theatres that have a really nurturing community around them of people who work in the theatre, even people who go to the theatre, and there are other theatres that just don't really feel nurturing at all. For instance, I was out in Canada for 6 weeks last year, kind of at the end of a load of 2-week residencies in Quebec. And that was an amazing experience because we were just made to feel totally at home throughout our entire time there. You know, everybody we were working with were so proud of their city, so keen to introduce us to their city. And it felt really like coming in and being welcomed into part of the community. So I think that can happen. And you do feel those places become your home.
So the presenters in the theater community really help shape those feelings in a way.
I can say that the work inside of we were an ensemble or a collective and less a company, but the folks that I did move around with, we were a site-specific, street theater, ritual-based social justice collective, like working particularly around women's rights and reproductive justice. And we built work together. Often, we built work together, period. And often what was required is that we would go into the communities where we were going to be performing and talk with them about what was going on and use that to, continue to build the show. And it's interesting doing street theater because sometimes, sometimes, particularly in New York, the street is your only home, like the housing is such that sometimes, all you have is the subway and the street and the strangers that you meet. And sometimes your presence on the street is a disruption. And so I think the work that we were creating, because it was about the places that we were, the conversation around home became an interesting one for me as a performer and a creator. And that goes back to like some education that I've gotten around social justice art practice, which is that you don't go into places where you haven't been asked to come, where you haven't been invited by the community that is there. And so, making work that is solid and rooted enough to move around, but that is open enough to listen and not adapt all the time, but to listen and receive became really like the most central part of what we did. But it's interesting. I don't know that I really thought about it in terms of home space, because we were creating work that belonged to the folks that we were sharing it with as much as it did us.
I feel at home behind a piano. I mean, so if there's a piano, I can play it, and I'm kind of back in my neutral territory. That feels like my space, and then the people that I'm around, the people that I'm working with, that will give me a sense of home and community. Home is interesting because sometimes, especially in New York, it's like ruling and it's not fun and home is stressful, or so sometimes when I'm on tour it's very relaxing compared to being at home. Like I'm taken care of, I'm at a hotel, people are paying for my food, people are picking me up at the airport. Like all those things are very nice. So sometimes being on tour can feel like the dream. And then you go back home. And also like sometimes traveling and doing a gig and fulfilling like a point in a mission it feels more like a journey, like a notch on the belt a little bit. It can be like, well, I did that, I did a good job, and now I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna celebrate the fact that I did that. I showed up, I did the thing. And so it depends. It just depends on the gig and the people.
I would agree about people. Like I really think that like it makes a space feel like, because like whenever I'm like getting ready to go somewhere, it's always like, well, I know anyone. And it's like if you don't, it's already like, oh, okay, well, I hope they're nice, you know, like oh, now I gotta make new friends, which is always so tough. But yeah, it's so interesting how like home can have a sense of complacency as well. Like, and I think that's why it's such a draw to like leave, and like but like the leaving can feel like home because you're escaping home, so that home can feel more like home when you return, you know. So it's like I'll go back to New York and I'll like, because like I haven't left long enough in a while where I've been like I want to go back, because like it gets so awful on you. But like whenever you're away, you can like kind of appreciate some of the little things that you wouldn't necessarily have appreciated about the space that you create that is yours, and then the ways in which that you have made that space for you, and then you existing in the world, it carries a bit of that everything around, like a mobile home. But yeah.
So on that note, I have a question about, so working as a freelancer and with a company, networks and acquiring the next gig, do you find that being on tour, that you're meeting in these circles, that becomes then an expansion on your network? Or do you feel disassociated with your home base city because you're in and out and so people aren't seeing you localized? This was something I experienced because most of my career was in Europe, and when I decided I think I want to stay in New York more, people didn't know. I didn't really work in New York that much. People were like, well, I don't know all these different places you've been, but you weren't at BAM in this season, or you've never worked here or here. And I'm curious to, but then it made me have different opportunities, and I'm just curious to know for you all, what does that feel like? Where do you form those kind of next ideas, next collaborators, next gigs?
I spent a long time living in London, but mainly working in Scotland. And the thing about the UK is that it's actually made up of these little theatre bubbles around different areas of the UK that don't necessarily mix and match with each other that much. So I was doing a huge amount of work in Scotland, but nobody in London had any idea who I was. And I was so busy either being in Scotland or on a train or a plane between London and Scotland that I never made any attempt to make contacts in London, because I was like, well, I'd really like to work closer to what was home at that point. But I don't, and also I'd need to turn down work that I've already got in order to actually take the time to make those contacts. So that was quite an odd thing of being in two different bubbles. But what I find increasingly is that the work kind of talks for itself, and having work out on tour is really valuable, because people will go and see that and will go, oh, who did that? Oh, I'm interested in that. And eventually you hit a critical mass where somebody's seen enough things that you've done to go, oh, actually, I should phone that person up. And I think that's almost more useful, certainly as a lighting designer, than the endless trying to be at every first night, trying to be at every opening night in every venue and meet every person in the room, but actually just having the work out there and having people see the work.
Oh, that's a great perspective.
There is no substitute for making something good in the first place.
Right.
As far as building a network, because you can be out, like you say, you can be out there and socialising. We're very lucky in Scotland having the Edinburgh Festival on our doorstep every August. It's the biggest theatre market in the world that comes to Edinburgh every year. How many shows this year? Knocking on 3,000 maybe. Every person that's booking a venue or an international festival is in August in Edinburgh in August, and so we have been very lucky to be able to present our work in that environment quite regularly over the years, and it's had exposure to those networks. But if the work ain't good in the first place, no one's gonna book it. And so really where all the effort and energy has to go is not on that far vision of, oh my God, my dream is to tour these festivals or to take my work out here. It starts here in the room right now, making the best possible thing that my imagination can imagine making, and from there the little circle will grow and the ripples will go out. Has been my experience anyway of how sort of to build a network, but definitely having the blessing of a really big marketplace on your front doorstep is not to be sniffed at. But like, how many people here could point to Glasgow on a map? Probably not that many. And we don't work out of London, we don't work out of New York, but I say it again, you make the good quality work and it will gain its reputation, and the network will grow, and the opportunities that come with that network growing come along with it.
Some thoughts here?
I've encountered like being out of town and then people forgetting that you exist.
Friends too sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And my strategy for, like, I guess my growth or pursuing creative relationships or routes has been one of my friends when I was just out of school told me this, like, the triangle model, which a lot of musicians use, which is you have to, there's the music, there's the people, and then there's the money. And there has to be two of the three things on the triangle in order for you to say yes. So if I really like the people, but they're not paying me and the music sucks, then I'm not going to do the gig. But if the money's good and I like the people, maybe the music's not good, then I know I need to pay my rent, I'll take the gig. But I'm not going to just say yes to a money gig that I don't want to do if that's the only point that I like. So if the person's good and I like their art, I'll do it because I want to be able to say yes to that part of my heart and my creativity. And I've had to send out emails, to, like, hey, just so y'all know, like, I'm back in town. I was in Chicago doing this thing, and now I'm here. So if you know anyone who's doing this thing, like, humbly just putting it out there that I can do that. So I don't think there's any shame in saying, like, voicing that you're present if people have thought that you may have disappeared or you're just not on their radar. I think people just sometimes need a gentle reminder. But it's been a thing for me, at least in the last 10 years, of just, like, kind of the perfect thing coming at the right time, and just like after this, I don't know what I'm doing between September 15th and October 4th, but I know when I go back to New York there will be 4 or 5 or 6 gigs that show up.
And what is that pushes you through? Is it like a trust in yourself? Do you have, like...
I don't know. I think it's a trust in my work, and just knowing that it's worked this long, so of course it should keep working. I guess until it doesn't, but I've seen the growth. Like, there's been, like, if I zoom out year after year, I go, well, I did this, and 3 years ago I wasn't doing that, and I'm connecting with these types of people, which are people that I want to be connecting with, and I wasn't able to connect with these people 5 years ago. So, like, something must be working, even if at the baseline I'm still maybe, like, financially insecure, or, like, there's other aspects of growth that I'm still concerned about. There's still proof there. So I don't know what, like, if it's just like, and I don't know if it's just faith or if it's I don't know, luck. It's probably a little bit of both.
Mix,
Yeah.
stirred up.
I think it's also, I'm learning this particularly right now, or in the last few years, about seasons and just trusting that there are seasons truly of workflow. Like for me, the last couple of years, the spring, early spring to late summer is just way too many things, all of the things all at once, overwhelmed. And then come late fall, there is nothing anymore. And that time between like November 12th and February 14th can be very scary, you know, and very upsetting. I think as performers often, or, you know, my experience of folks I've talked with, you know, the experience is like because of the way the industry is set up and because of the audition process and all these things, so much of our sense of, our sense of self-worth and validity is placed outside of us, at least in practice. And so fighting to resituate that in yourself is so essential. It's so essential to really figure out how to get clear with yourself about how you are gauging your understanding of success. And to go back, yeah, there are just seasons, and sometimes they change. Like for me right now, the summer and the spring are great. The fall and the winter are a struggle bus. And so, you know, for me now I'm strategizing, okay, now I have all of this abundance in the spring, like how can I really do my best to, at least financially, like spread that into my winter? Figuring out that balance is super hard. And I'll say to your question around network and, you know, presence or not, it's worked for me in both ways. You know, sometimes I have had to like reintroduce myself to friends and colleagues like truly every year, and that can be awful. And then have been several times over where people are like, I know you're always out of town, so like let me book you now, you know, which is great. That's right, I'm leaving tomorrow. So, you know, that has happened quite a bit. I think, you know, it's tricky. Like sometimes when people just know that you are leaving and working, they get very excited about you, and sometimes they dismiss you. You know, both things happen. I think this life is so much about like centering and balance. Centering and balance.
You made me think of a question that I thought about when I was touring a lot. Is like, how do you maintain mentors and inspiration of other artists when you know, like I would always roll up in a city and I'm so jet lagged, but I'm like, this is my one chance to see the other artists who are in the same festival, because they're going to load out and then we load in tomorrow. How do you kind of maintain that when you're on the go? Because I think it is so important, right? And that to have people that are that you're mentoring and that mentor you is so vital in a sense of like kind of maintaining that growth and inspiration. I don't know if anyone's.
Well, just since I did this festival recently in Montreal, and I performed on it as a part of it's called New Faces, and the other people who got it in the stand-up category, I went to like go and see them, and I was truly so tired, and I was beat from like doing so many different things during the day, and I was just like, you know what, no, I'm gonna see these people, and it was incredible. And I was like, you know, I feel like sometimes like you have to honor what you're feeling in your body, but I know that it was so beneficial for me to watch all of these other up and coming comedians and like see all these other people like do their thing and like you know, get these 5 minutes to do this material that they've been working on for the past 7, you know, 10 years in comedy, and to watch them do it with ease and perfection and also with engagement in the audience, and it's like so feeding to you. And these are people who are my peers, and so it's like not even, you know, like going to see you know, wow, all of the comedians that came to my head are problematic, but it's because they're in the news. But going to see a non-problematic comedian, and like, but like, you know, they're up there and they've been working hard for a long time, so there's a lot of like, you know, casualness in how they deliver, and like to see someone who is hungry and hustling, it's so edifying, because it's like, that's, you see you in them, and it's like, oh, I can keep going, I can continue doing this. And it was really nice that the host, who is like a bigger stand-up, just really acknowledge that hustle and acknowledge what it means to be working in that space, and to have that opportunity, and that to work that hard for that was so important. So yeah, I really find that like getting to watch things out of town is really, when we went to watch the Ethiopian circus, so incredible. And like, I don't know, there's just so many ways in which we could have just gone home because we were tired, but we didn't. And it's like, there's so many things that you don't know what will potentially inspire and give something to you. So I do think it's important whenever you leave, and also just like to interact with another culture and people who think differently than you is so important.
Awesome. We're to start, I want to open it up to questions, but I'm just going to ask the panel one last question before we throw it out. So a lot of people in watching are studying the arts and are thinking about what is it like to have a career? What are the things that I need to do when I graduate to kind of start this? And I'm wondering, from a touring perspective, what would be just like one thing that you would want to say that they should maybe be thinking about, or an approach, or ways that helped you kind of start to go down that path?
I would say you have to start. Like, you can theorize, you can imagine, you can picture, but you have to just get into that room and start making something, because nothing else comes until you have something to put out into the world that's physical and tangible and can be looked at and shaped and massaged and turned into something. And the first thing you make very likely runs the chance of being absolutely dreadful. I say this from painful personal experience. You know, we always imagine that the first thing that we put out there is somehow going to change the world and change our world, and actually that is not necessarily true. But what it does do is it gives you that first like push off into a space, and then from there all the other things can happen. But until you get brave and you just get in there and start making, none of the other things can come. And it's beautiful to have that vision in your head, like the long view of where you want to be. I remember writing our first grant application when we were fresh out of drama school, and we were asking for the most piddly amount of money that, you know, could barely pay for anything. But we, you know, I remember writing, Vox Motus will be an international touring company that does blah, 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 blah. And I'm sure whoever read that laughed and laughed and laughed and thought this was just hilarious and terribly precocious. That was the long-term vision. What we made with that first tiny little piece of money was for 3 nights in a basement venue in the grungiest space in Glasgow you could imagine, with like lights hanging off the walls with dodgy connections. Simon didn't light it. And, you know, and it got panned. I always have to say this because it's really, really important to share these things, I think. 2 reviewers turned up. They told us to go back to drama school. It was painful, but we had started and we had done something, and there was enough in there for those around us whose voices we listened to or respected, because unsolicited opinions is a whole other conversation, to say, no, there's something in there, try again. So that is my 2 bobs worth of advice. Just start, even if it's awful.
Anyone else?
So I think I'd say to be careful of ruts. That I think it's very easy, and I think I managed to avoid it, but I've seen it happen to other people, that they end up doing something because it's comfortable, that isn't necessarily progressing them forwards to where they want to be in their long-term goal. And you know, they'll do that for 5 years and then go at the end of those 5 years, crikey, what was I doing? And I think a lot of those times, those can be things that are incredibly useful to do for a year or for 2 years, but then you need to pick yourself out of it. There's in the UK, because design paths to be a lighting designer in the UK aren't as clear as they perhaps are in the US, where there's more of a career ladder. People take lots of different routes, and sometimes those routes involve working as touring technicians, working as relights in the industry, and it's very easy to go into those and then suddenly find that you've spent a decade doing it, and that wasn't actually what you set out to do. So I think it's, if you really want to progress up, and that's really what you want to do, be aware of those cul-de-sacs.
Have that.
Yeah.
Keep your eye on the prize.
Yeah.
Anybody else before we break it out to questions?
I just say, this is a real practical thing, but save your money. Save your money always. Save your money. You don't know when the next job is coming. You don't know when. Like, the best advice somebody gave me was like, when I got a very big job, they were like, save your money, and I was like, it's fine. I think you have this idea in your mind that like you're gonna get a gig, and then it's just like, okay, now we're bankrolling and I'm straight, and like that's not really how it works. Like it's kind of like, oh, I have a job this month, and then 12 months from now I still don't. But like you just have to save. Just save all of your money. Save your money like you'll never get a job again, but you will because you keep working. But save it like you won't.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's very right. Still learning this lesson. I also think learning to collaborate is really important, and maybe, I don't know, I feel like in college or university or whatever, you have a lot of group projects and maybe you're practicing it already. But I think often as artists, after we leave whatever school we're in, we do have to do a lot to defend ourselves against the world sometimes, particularly if you want to keep on your goals. So I think obviously artistic integrity is so important, but really practicing and learning how to collaborate with folks is so essential. You will find yourself working with people who you don't agree with, whose aesthetics you don't really care for, potentially. But learning how to listen and recalibrate around your integrity and around what the project needs is so important, and so many folks really go a long time without knowing how to do it.
I think if you can't collaborate, you find yourself closed out of job opportunities.
Yes.
So I always want to stick a sign above our rehearsal door that says, abandon all ego, ye who enter here, because we have a very, very collaborative space, and if people can't open themselves up and plan, and by ego I do not mean leaving your integrity at the door, I mean leaving that defensive part of yourself that's trying to protect your contribution to the room.
Mm-hmm.
If you can just put that to the side for a minute and listen, it's so true, and you will find yourself working more and more because you're actually contributing to the space. It's beautiful advice, I think.
All right, we have a few minutes left for questions. Yeah.
Just one thing, we didn't want to interrupt you while you were speaking, but if your mouth's getting dry, we have some water. Anyone want to know? All good? Grab it.
Thank you.
And then I also have a question, but you can go first.
Okay. I had a question when Simon made me think that when you talk about Vox, about career paths, and I don't know whether any of you as artists have a goal that you're driving towards, or is the interest for you to do different things each time and to stretch yourself in different directions? Is there an end point that you want to be or become, or do you have to just take that with a pinch of salt and just try and experience the most, get the most juice out of the moment as you're doing it?
There's like the exterior and the interior to me. So the exterior goal always, for me, it comes back to like my ego and what I want people to know me as, and like the type of things I would get asked for, or the level that I would work on. Of course, I have those dreams and wishes, and I want to see that exterior proof. But for me, it's always how much deeper can I go, or like what do I need to discover in here and share that will then, have some type of maybe small butterfly effect, whether it's in the room of people that I'm working with or beyond. Hopefully those two things line up, but for me it's important to stay focused on the internal aspects of what I'm trying to develop. And oftentimes I'm surprised by where it's taken me. Like the last year I've been working in ways that I never really thought I would have been. Like the projects that I've been doing are just beyond what I thought that I was originally going to be doing, and I'm really enjoying it and liking it. And so I think if I was so fixated on the external, I may have found myself in a rut. may have found myself pigeonholed or frustrated, wondering why I'm not getting the thing I'm wanting. But because I'm still, day by day going back to like what I need to do here, then the proof kind of unfolds as it's happening, I guess is how I would describe it.
I'm probably the worst person to kind of give long-term career advice, because I've always just kind of careered from one project to the other, kind of. I've never had a long-term plan. I've kind of just wanted to do things that were interesting and that excited me. And most of the time that's what will make me decide to do one project rather than another project is this something that's exciting? And I think as long as I can keep doing exciting work, that's what sustains me, rather than kind of any propulsion up in terms of that work being bigger or larger or grander.
Whereas actually, when you start a company, you need to have a reason for it's such hard work just getting a company up and running. You need to have a goal, you need to be able to visualize something, otherwise you kind of need to know why you're doing it for yourself, and also who you're doing it for. Who do you imagine your audience to be? And so you have to have those visions, but it's interesting how regularly that has to move for it not to become just making the same stuff, because you can make something, it's very good, everyone likes it, you could just go on doing the same thing, and eventually your soul will die. So you need to keep shifting the goals, and sometimes it comes about really organically. This little opportunity comes along, and you sort of go off and there. But I think always kind of knowing where you're striving for, especially when you're taking people with you on the journey, is has been really important. And the more that you can articulate that, it helps keep you focus, but that doesn't mean to say that focus is an immovable thing. In fact, it would be dreadful if it was.
Yeah, I think probably similar to Matthew. I went to school for acting and was like very set on being super famous and super rich, very and that has not happened for me yet. But what I have realized what I have been trying to integrate into my understanding of path and career is that you also have to be humble enough to listen to what is coming your way. Mm-hmm. So in the last 4 years, so much choreography work has come my way, and I didn't really identify as a choreographer before. As something that I wanted to do, something that I was doing at all. And for a while I resisted it. So I was like, okay, I'm an actor, please hire me for the acting job. And they were like, absolutely not, so sorry. And I struggle with that. I love acting, and I do think I'm quite good at it. But what has come my way has led me into rooms and into relationships with folks that have given me opportunities to do the acting that I want to do. And so I think what you're saying as well, there is a release that you have to have around your path. Keeping it in mind, but knowing that it probably won't unfold in the way that would be very affirming and easy for it to. That sentence went a place, but does that make sense?
Where you start out and where you end up just so so far apart. I trained as a performer. I wanted to train in the UK. I wanted to work for the Royal Shakespeare Company. That was my life ambition. And if you told me when I went to train that that this path would be so different. I would have laughed. I just would not have believed. But like you say, if you stay open to what's coming your way and listen to the opportunities that are out there, and listen to your own self as well, you know. Yeah, the day I realized that fame and glory were really low on my priority list and would be really unhappy place, for me was the most liberating feeling of realizing, that to be a famous actor would be absolutely awful. Is just,
Trusting your joy is the thing. I feel like you just said that.
Nice.
Trusting your joy and like following that is so important.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll be brief. I went to school when I went to school to NYU, and I went to school for musical theater, and that's all I ever wanted to do in high school, and that's all I ever wanted out of life was to be on Broadway, and then I started doing sketch comedy and taking improv and doing all of these things that I never really thought of as a career, and I just kept doing it. I don't know. Sometimes you know, but you don't know. Mm-hmm. Like, sometimes you're just doing something because you think it's a thing, and then it becomes your whole life in a really, like, magical way. So I think, like, be open to the things that make you happy and bring you joy and give you excitement when you get ready to do them, because maybe your Broadway Tony Awards plan isn't exactly what you're gonna do. Not that any of you are in musical theater, but
but it's fun because I think this comes back to your thing earlier about going and feeding yourself and seeing work and being mentored and inspired, because I think the reason we think, I want to be a film star, I want to be on Broadway, is because that is the top surface level of engagement. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly you go and see some weird little avant-garde thing where the performers are naked and rolling around in the light. Oh, that's interesting. Bit of my brain has been opened up there. And then you maybe go and see, some live art from New York where someone's laying on spiky glass or something, and another little hatch in your brain opens up. And the more that you go and see stuff, the more the little hatches open up in your brain, and you start to find the things that really trigger your joy and excitement, and suddenly, you're watching a Belgian dance company going, oh my God, I want to make a stage move like that, for example. So I think the more that you feed the person inside you and don't just accept the topsoil of creative output, the more you're going to find your place in the world.
I think that's an amazing place to take a pause, because some people on our panel need to go to rehearsal. There's some people in the audience that are going straight to the Real AD rehearsal, and then we can have some casual conversations before we end this more formally. I do want to thank all of our panelists here for taking time out of their rehearsal schedules, out of their jet-lagged first day in Abu Dhabi. And also thank the Art Gallery for letting us be in this wonderful reading room space, which isn't actually officially open till next week. And I do want to point out, for those of you in the audience who are students here or live here in Abu Dhabi, that we have a reference library that is just right over here. You're going to see some more books there within the week, and those are book titles that have been collected from all the artists in our season, including our wonderful artists here, about the themes of their work, about artistic techniques, about careers in the arts. And this is a resource here, so all throughout the year, if you want to come in and kind of check that out. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.